Hi, this is Corey Johnston, and today's lesson is going to come from the 18th chapter in the book of Revelation. Herein we read of the swift, final, and total destruction of Babylon, but in order to lead into that, we must qualify or define our terms. Babylon was the world's original metropolis, although it is written that Cain, some of his descendants, founded cities. The grandson of Noah was Nimrod, who founded Babylon, and not long after he did, it became the gravitational orbit in which all inhabitants of the earth gravitated on. Tried to construct a tower all the way to the heavens, and that marks the divine intervention, where he said enough and scattered the people who had gravitated there and confused their language, scattered them to the portions of the earth. Babylon also witnessed a resurgence under the king Hammurabi, whose main historical legacy is the original codified or written law to which we are indebted to. He was also an empire building. And then later, the Chaldean people, it was the capital city of the empire, which eventually subsumed Judah after posing a menacing threat for some time. But Judah, after that, they experienced an exchange at the hands of foreign oppressors after the Babylonians were conquered by the Medo-Persians, whose emperor Cyrus was not so much a conqueror of them, but a liberator thereof. And then after the Persian Empire was subsumed by the Greeks, more specifically the Seleucid dynasty, to whom one of the Alexander's generals, after the war, which subsumed after he didn't declare his successor, the generals fought amongst themselves, and it was to Seleucid to whom the largest geographical terrain was wrested control in. But there was no Greek city, there was no united Greek empire. So after the Romans displaced the Greeks, then Babylon came to be symbolized as the Rome, the city, the center city of their foreign oppressors, came to be known as Babylon, and is referred to as such when Peter, he is writing there in the first epistle, the 5th chapter, 13th verse of the epistle which bears his name. And so even now by the year 117 AD, the Roman Emperor Trajan, under whom Rome witnessed its greatest territorial expansion, he encroached on much of the turf of what belonged to the Parthian Empire, which was the descendants of the Medo-Persian people. But he went to Babylon in the year 117 AD and encountered virtually a ghost town. And the book of Revelation is written in 96 AD, so there's really no plausible conjecture that it wasn't in a state too dissimilar from the one that Trajan found. But even though the physical city perished, the symbolism survived as the symbol of worldliness and acquisitiveness and empire. So that by the end times, the empire which rules will be a one-world government. So Babylon is symbolically representative of that. And that being said, we're going to open with the opening verse, which reads, "And after this I saw another angel coming down from the heavens, having great authority, and the earth was lightened from his esteem." John is the recipient of this revelation, and it comes to him in visions, which is one of the special forms of special revelation. And an angel frequently... a multitude of angels frequently appear throughout the book of Revelation. And what does the angel say? He says, "And he cried with a mighty voice, saying, Babel the great is fallen, and has become a dwelling place of demons, a haunt for every unclean spirit, and a haunt for every unclean and hated bird." Babel is an alternate name for Babylon, which in the Hebrew language translates roughly as Babel, in other words, a source of confusion, and that's what happened after the scattering of the human race, which had gravitated around Babylon. They had one language, and it was very much an embryonic one-world government. So we want to understand that it's destined for destruction, and the term Babel and Babylon are synonymous and interchangeable. "Because all the nations have drunk of the wine of the wrath of her whoring, And the kings of the earth have committed whoring with her, and the merchants of the earth have become rich through the power of his righteous livings. Now, by the nation, he clarifies that it is all the nations. So at this historical juncture towards the end time, entire earth will be ruled by a one world government, and Babylon, we don't know the precise location of the capital city through which the anti-Messiah will rise and rule, or once he establishes it, but it is symbolically represented as Babylon. So all the nations were unable to resist the snares and temptations of whoring with her and making profit in trade through collaboration with the pan-national super state government. And the riotous living, that means they were loose, licentious, and indecent in manners and behavior. And I heard another voice from the heavens saying, "Come out of her, my people, lest you share in her sins, and lest you receive her plagues." So he extends a warning to the saints who are currently in Babylon to separate themselves completely. And the doctrine of separation is something we inherited from our Jewish forebears. We can read of the doctrine in places such as Psalm 101, verses 3 through 8 in the Old Testament, and 2 Corinthians 6:14 through 7:1 in the New Testament. And we are to keep ourselves separated from the world and its harmful influences, but that does not suggest that we should be completely isolated or unconcerned with the lost and fallen condition of the world. So it's a delicate balancing act, separatism and evangelism, and I think I did a YouTube video on that. You can type in Corey Johnston, separatism, evangelism. Because her sins have piled up to reach the heavens, and Elohim has remembered her unrighteousness. So this is not a mere happenstance that, sin is incidental to the saints, but for sinful people, much more so a metropolis of sinful people, their negative records stack literally to the heavens, and nothing ever escapes the notice of him who is omnipresent and omniscient. Those are the attributes of capable of being everywhere at once and unlimited or infinite intelligence, respectively. Render to her as she indeed rendered, and repay her double according to her works. And the cup which she has mix for her double. So the principle of retribution or retaliation is going to be inflicted on them, so much so that they're going to reap more of than the wickedness of their of the sin and iniquity they sowed. Twofold we are read and warned. So the object moral of the story is that sin never pays, not only in the immediate sense, but especially in the long run. So it's a poor investment to associate yourselves with sinful people and sinful cultures. As much as she esteemed herself and lived luxuriously, so much torture and grief give to her, because in her heart she says, "I sit as queen, and I am not a widow, and I do not see mourning at all." So underneath the gilded exterior is somewhat suppressed wickedness, which they choose to ignore or remain oblivious to. Now, all that shines, all that glitters isn't always necessarily gold, and the Gilded Age was the term coined by Mark Twain in reference to the age of the robber barons, whereby many the new industrial class accumulated vast sums of money for themselves, but the other half lived in abject poverty. It was two worlds away. So that's very much manifest and magnified in the final end times, and they have no ethical qualms about the persecution which they inflict as a matter of course in order to maintain their iron grip and control on power, and they prefer to look away, but Elohim remembers all. There is nothing that can escape him. Because of this, her plague shall come in one day, death and mourning and famine, and she shall be burned up with fire, because Yahweh Elohim, who judges her, is mighty. So the judgment of Babylon is going to be swift, total, and inescapable. We read that it will come in a day. Now, the judgments of the Almighty, I think in Hosea 512, it's compared to a moth or something that reflects an infinitesimal dosage, which creeps up incrementally, and also as a lion in the 14th verse of the same chapter. So this is going to be the judgment of the lion, and the lamb is going to return as the lion not long thereafter. So the suffering servant will return as the conquering king and punish wickedness and defeat evil eternally and accordingly. And there is no power on earth that is capable of equaling or let alone being superior to Elohim, who is sovereign and omnipotent. That's the attribute of unlimited or infinite strength. And the kings of the earth who committed whoring and lived luxurious with her shall weep and mourn over her when they see the smoke of her burning. Now the kings of the earth who consented to the pan-national conglomerate government will be disappointed in their investment, in the motivational factor which compelled them to do it is to increase their wealth and luxury. But this reminds us of the formula that forms the basis of much of the subsequent Old Testament prophecies as established in Deuteronomy: comfort for the afflicted and affliction for the comforted. Standing at a distance for fear of her torture, saying, Woe, woe, the great city of Babel, the mighty city, because of your judgment, has come in 1 hour. So it's not only going to happen in a day, but in a single hour. So that's even more swift than a single day. And it is capable to wipe it out in a single second, but for his purposes, he deigns fit to designate the period of its destruction as lasting an hour. And the merchants of the earth weep and mourn over her, because no one buys their merchandise anymore. Now, not long before this, the mark of the beast becomes whereby you signify and identify with the anti-Messiah, and it becomes necessary in order to purchase or engage in commerce, but their commercial transactions are going to cease in a moment in time, in the twinkling of an eye, to borrow Paul's phrase from 1 Corinthians 15 in reference to the resurrection. Merchandise of gold and silver, and precious stone and pearls, and fine linen and purple, and silk and scarlet, and all citron wood, and every object of ivory, and every object of most precious wood, and bronze, iron, and marble, and cinnamon and incense, and fragrant oils and frankincense, and wine and oil, and fine flour and wheat, and cattle and sheep, and horses and carriages, and bodies and lives of men. So there is no shortage in the stockpile of worldly wealth and luxurious goods. You can just go down the list. Nearly every conceivable item of worldly wealth or value is contained in Babylon, but it's going to be instantly eradicated in a single hour, in a single day. So investment in sources of worldly wealth are one which pays no eternal dividends, and we are instructed to eschew materialism as an end in itself. And the fruit that your being longed for has gone from you, and all your riches and splendor are lost to you, and you shall find them no more, not at all. So what they once had an abundance of will be instantly and permanently evaporated, and the items of the earth and the riches and the treasures thereof are destined to be their perishable items. So it's really a poor investment to eternally invest in them. The merchants of these, those who became rich by her, shall stand at a distance for fear of her torture, weeping and mourning, and saying, Woe, woe, the great city that was dressed in fine linen, and purple and scarlet, and adorned with gold and precious stones and pearls. Therein we gather that this is going to be a sudden shock. One anticipated that a city so magnificent and splendorous and wealthy and luxurious can come to naught in so short a time, and there is no all the elaborate structural artifices are going to be instantly and permanently eviscerated, and that without hope for remedy. For in 1 hour such great riches was laid waste, and every shipmaster, and every passenger, and sailor, and as many as work the sea, stood at a distance. So those who engaged and trafficked in the commerce with this this future center of iniquity will keep themselves at deliberate remove from the destruction of the city in the hopes of escaping it. But even if they escape it in this lifetime, they cannot escape the judgment and the hell which awaits them. And cried out when they saw the smoke of her city burning, saying, What is like this great city? Therein we learn that it's once more it communicates much of what was communicated in a previous passage, that it's going to be inexplicable, the suddenness of its impending and final destruction, and irrevocable destruction will be a shocking sight for those who walk by sight, not by faith. The eyes. So it has a much enticing and alluring to the human eyes, but we who walk by faith do not succumb to the snares of the same. And they threw dust on their heads and cried out, weeping and mourning, and saying, Woe, woe, the great city in which all who had ships on the seas became rich by her wealth, for in 1 hour she was laid waste. So once more, they are going to be going through the ritual mechanics of repentance, whereby which one pours themselves in dust on their heads, and sackcloth is the typical garb associated with the repentant process. But they're going to be remorseful, but not repentant. They're going to be repentance is the exponential extension by which the things which stimulate remorse are the dispositions which stimulate the things one has to be remorseful from are eternally eliminated, or more or less permanently so. But we don't read that in here. We read that they're sad because they had invested so much time, effort, and energy in the things of the world which do not last but are in fact destined to perish, and that in a moment in time. Rejoice over her, O heavens, and your sacred apostles and prophets, for Yahweh has completely avenged you on her. Now, the sight of destruction of the wicked is not in itself a cause for joy for the saints, but the fact that his justice is accomplished, it very much is. So we should take no delight in the death of the wicked, inasmuch as the one who we worship and model ourselves on does not, in Ezekiel 33:11 and somewhere in one of the Peters. And one mighty angel picked up a stone like a great millstone and threw it into the sea, saying, With such a rush the great city Babel shall be thrown down, and shall not be found any more at all. So it's going to sink to the bottom of the earth. It's going to be located somewhere in the abyss, and what was once palpable and observable on the surface of the earth will no longer be so. It's going to be sunk, much like the ships which engaged in the commerce which made it wealthy. And the sound of harpists and musicians and flutists and trumpeters shall not be heard in you any more at all, and no craftsman of any trade shall be found in you any more at all, and the sound of a millstone shall not be heard in you any more at all. So the commerce which had made the city great will be no more, and it's going to be a distant memory, and there's going to be no chance for resurrection or restitution or restoration of the former practices through which it had accumulated its worldly prestige, wealth, and power. And the light of a lamp shall not shine in you any more at all, and the voice of a bridegroom and bride shall not be heard in you any more at all. For your merchants were the great ones of the earth, but by your drug sorcery all the nations were led astray. Now, the drug sorcery has relevance in our modern worlds. We had in 1960, healthcare spending accounted for 5% of America's GDP. since that time, the figure has skyrocketed almost fourfold. So we have an entire society of over-medicated and under-motivated people, and drugs, whether illicit or pharmaceutical, are a cheap shortcut to our travails, which ail us, and those who manufacture and the drugs are destined for the lake of fire. We also read in Revelation 21:8. I did one on that. You can type in Corey Johnston, Revelation 21, the new heaven, new earth, and new Jerusalem. And there's going to be no light or celebrations or weddings or anyone even to celebrate them in once the city is finally and irrevocably destroyed. And in her was found the blood of prophets and saints and all who were slain on the earth. So during the tribulation, which is the final 3.5-year period of the anti-Messiah's 7-year rise and rule, will be an episode of unprecedented bloodshed, which will test the faith of the saints more so than anything else. And because they shed the blood of the prophets and saints, they will meet the same and more eternally so, because those who die for the faith those who die martyrs are guaranteed to secure their eternal salvation. And that's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much. Tune in next time. Bye-bye.